So the DAC3202, I'll go into a little bit more detail, but not too much, right? About the DAC3202 installation and things to worry about. So going back to the front and rear connections, we covered this earlier, but let's go over it again. So we have a USB port. You can plug it in, it'll pull logs automatically. You can also leverage this to upgrade the unit. If you have the newer version, put it on a flash drive, reboot, and that's it. If it sees it has a higher version, it'll upgrade. If you have default settings, you want to restore, you can restore it to defaults by just naming a file a certain name and plugging it in and rebooting. You can back up and restore. You can do a lot of really cool things. Ultimately, the DAC3202 doesn't really need all that functionality. It's just cool that it was there. We did port that over to the DMA, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in the DMA deck here in just a few minutes. But I wanted to point that out. The DAC3202 was such a great product, like I mentioned earlier, from a support standpoint, that we really wanted to continue that going into the next product. So on the front, we've got the signal indicators. As you can imagine, the light up brighter, the stronger the signal is. In my experience, it's not all that amazing on the DAC3202. Generally, you can't tell that it's on at all. Even at the loudest, I find that they just tend to just flicker to a kind of a medium brightness. That they aren't very bright. You can mute everything from the web UI in the unit. So if you do find yourself in a situation where my DAC3202 is not putting any audio, check this light. If that's on, you need to connect and unmute, and audio will continue as it should. But that's an easy one to get into. So we added that LED just for that reason. And then these are just in-out air power connections. So this is showing you the Dolby Atmos Connect. In, out is not necessary, depending on your workflow. But if this is the last one in the chain, it does not necessarily need to go back to the CP850. But it should at least be getting an in. This means that there's an error of some kind, and that's just for power. DC power, so that's from the power brick that's included with the DAC3202. Our Dolby Atmos Connect in out are right here, and then our command or auditorium network connection would be right there. Okay. Oh, did I? Nah. That'll do it. Okay. This says what I just said. Good. USB logs and backup. I'm going to repeat this all with the DMA, but this is the basic idea. We support most formats. Got to wait about a minute once you insert it, and we'll just kick out the logs and the backup file. And then let's say you do that, and then you take the USB out and then reinsert it. Instead of writing over those logs, we'll just, if we see that there's already a zip, a backup, and a logs package, then we'll make it 1 and 2 and 3 and so on. And then you can just stack up as many files as you want because you're a jerk and you have nothing better to do with your day but just take a USB in and out of a DMA. But if you're going to multiple units, it's actually pretty handy. You can actually pull logs from 6 units in a row with a USB and nothing else. So that's why we designed it that way. And that way we're not overriding the logs and so on. So, and then yeah, for upgrade, you can actually just anything, whether it's an upgrade or it's the backup. And here I go into the restore defaults. So this has helped people out of a few jams. You don't have to pull the logs and look up the IP address like we mentioned before. You could just restore it to defaults and get to its default IP address. So the trick there is that you would just make a file, just create a folder, name it DAC3202 restore defaults, rename it, delete the .txt extension, put that on the flash drive, leave that on the flash drive, whichever, and plug it in and reboot it, and it would reboot, it would read this file, it would say, I see, and it would restore the defaults. If it works, then it will leave a file named DAC3202 restore complete.dac. There's nothing in that file, it doesn't do anything, it's just an affirmation that it went through and that it did what you wanted it to. It's a little weird at first, but it's a slick system, and we really liked it. Again, we ported this over to the DMA, so it's worth mentioning. And if there is a USB that has a higher version than what's currently on the unit, it will automatically upgrade to it on the next reboot. Generally useful, but if it's already, if you didn't mean to upgrade it, something to keep in mind. Again, only 2 versions have ever existed for this, and we want you at the higher version, so it shouldn't be a problem, but bears mentioning. And then once it's upgraded, it won't upgrade again. Right? It has to be a higher version than the one that it's already at. So for the most part, it's pretty foolproof for the most part. We've already been over this. We've already been over this. And we've already been over this. So again, this is part of our modular training program in case you're just looking at one deck. A lot of the stuff is redundant. We've already been over this. Oh, I will point out, because we like to make things fun, right? If you know your default IP addresses in the Dolby network scheme, right? Everything on the auditorium network should be at IP address 129 or higher, right? The DSS auditorium network default is 192.168.x being your auditorium number, .129, 133 for the projector, 134 for a Series 1, so on and so forth, right? And then, like, you know, the CP750 and the 850, we all gave them IP addresses. Somebody decided that this was going to be 192.168.1.5 out of the box, which you cannot see on the auditorium network of a Dolby Show Store because the subnet's 128 at the end. We actually separate those two. So, yeah. So you can connect to it right out of the box if it's the default IP address, but if you want to put it on a Dolby network scheme for whatever reason, you'll probably have to go through and change that. Going forward, all our products do actually conform to the previous scheme, and we go above 129, just so you knew. But once you do connect to it, this is what the web UI looks like. Pretty simple. We got our network, as by network I mean your IP addresses and whatnot here. You got the host name, NTP server that you're connecting to, IP address of the unit. Excuse me. You can click here for the system info, and then all your navigation windows are here. Up here you'll see certain status. You can see that we're green on the on these ports. We have a clock lock, meaning I'm connected to an AES incoming AES67, and I'm locked to the clock on that. That's good. Dolby Atmos Connect input. So you can have the input green and the lock gray, meaning I'm receiving it, but I'm not locked to the timing, reboot, etc. Start troubleshooting. But it gives you an indicator. On that same network page, if you go from network and click at Dolby Atmos Connect, then we'll get into the settings for AES67 and that sort of thing. This is where it gets fun. We're going to repeat this in just a minute in the DMA. But the idea here is that, let's say I have a CP850. It's connected to a DMA 32300. That's a 32-channel DMA. And to a DAC3202, this guy. If I were to connect these three together, I would care very much about these numbers, but which ones do I care about? Which ones do I not care about? What should they be? So the basic idea here is that everything here should be the same, although we found that static IP address isn't that important in AES67. We think of static IP address as being very important in networking. In AES67, it simply is not. So you could actually change this number, and it wouldn't matter, in theory. The PTP domain number does matter. We've decided 109 is a great number, and that's what it is. You can always deviate from that and try something else, in which case your knowledge of AES67 and your experience in handling that and changing values and connecting them is all up to you. We're just pointing out the standard that we already set and works with our devices out of the box. So these are the default values out of the box, so you shouldn't have to change any of this, but the questions that we ask is, why is this 109? Why is this 239, blah, blah, blah? Well, that's what we chose, and so that's what it should be. And if for some reason it gets changed, you can use this as a reference to go back or restore defaults or something like that to get you back where you need to be. But all these values, for the most part, I'm just pointing them out that the sending device, the CP850, and the receiving devices are going to have similar values that are actually going to be the same across the board. The source UDP port on the sending device should match the source UDP port in both of these. Even though they're handling different channels, right, they're still saying that the source UDP port is where we begin counting with, that's A equals 1, right? That we're just saying that we start with 1 as the first port. Then the last thing is RTP destination port should always be 6517. What does change is these ports here. Everything here is correct at the moment with one exception. On the DAC3202, I want this one to be channels 33 through 64. Right? I'm going to let this guy handle channels 1 through 32. So all I have to do on a DAC3202 is click a button. For the DAC3202, we made that pretty easy. But you can actually get more granular and actually choose the channels by blocks of 8. And that's where the UDP ports come in. I'll get into that more in the DMA deck here in a minute. So steel yourself for that. There's some audio controls in the DAC3202, so out of the box, and you wire it up and you plug it in. You can go ahead and actually run, you can adjust your delays, but most importantly, you can actually generate pink noise from the DAC3202. So if you just have speakers and wires from the speakers run to the rack, you can go ahead and at least start firing things, right, and making sure that channel 1 is channel 1 and so on, right, even before you've connected to the CP850 or anything else. At least knock that one out, and you don't have to generate, you don't have to like connect a bunch of other stuff to do it. You can go ahead and wire everything up, do your pink noise, slide your slider down and then up as needed, and just verify without having to take a 9-volt battery, right, and pop your speakers and possibly blow them. So that's always nice. So that's the DAC3202. Any questions about that?
Does the pinouts come pre-made, or is that something that has to be, or the pinouts listed?
It's a Tascam pinout.
I'm not sure what that is it?
It's a standard pro audio. Okay. We seem to be going that way.
Okay.
A lot of people are. I see Tascam a lot in Dante devices and a bunch of other stuff. So the reason we chose it is because it's really easy to find Tascam cables. Okay. We don't sell them.
But they do come pre-made?
Yes.
And the wires just can go to the amps then?
Yep, you can get them to bare wire. For some reason, I find that bare wire is actually the most expensive option sometimes. So sometimes I'll just, I had to ship some out to somebody. I just ordered the ones with XLRs and told them just cut off the XLRs, and they were just like, sweet. Those were like $50 as opposed to $100-something. They were like, oh, I have to custom make the cables and tin the ends, and I was like, yeah sure. But so you can get Tascam cables, really easy.